Daniel, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
What is a shocking vulnerability that you've discovered during your pen testing?
Sure. So this one is actually kind of a fun story. I was doing some staff hog for a really big organization, and one of the things that they wanted us to focus in on was their single sign-on implementation. They were using SAML. And for those that don't necessarily know how SAML works, you get a ticket, and then you need that ticket in order to do certain things. And that ticket is encoded, and you can re-encode it and self-sign it. And ideally, the service should reject those self-signed encoded responses. Unfortunately, the service didn't. So all I really needed to do was to take, instead of using my email address, I just took an administrator's email address, jammed it into the certificate, re-signed it, and sent it off. And it allowed me to get that privilege escalation. Then I'm operating in the system as an administrator. I think the funny part about it was when I told the developers that this is what I could do with their service, they didn't believe me. So I had the very vindicating experience of being able to replicate it on camera. And as I'm doing it, I'm typing it in and I'm like, yeah, you can see here I'm an administrator. And they kind of go and they're like, oh, stop, you're in production. You're going to break everything. So that was one of those moments it was kind of surprising that they still kind of had it open, but it was also kind of fun that you get that level of, oh, snap, you can actually do this sort of stuff. And I think for those of us that are in the industry, you can often get that sense of, what is the word I'm looking for? We're definitely gonna have to edit this. What is it?
It's almost like a
Yeah.
disbelief, right? Like, I mean, there's
Yeah.
because I imagine in your proof of concept, you had this laid out, but even when you read the proof of concept of watching what you did in a report or something, it is probably like, how do you do it? Or I still don't understand, or like I still don't believe it works this way. Is that what happened here?
I think it's more so that because I also come from a background of developing, and they have this sense of I've developed it in such a way that it's going to work and it's only going to work the way that I know that it's supposed to work. So if you're telling me that it's going to work in a way that it's not supposed to work, now I'm dubious. Now I'm putting up my skeptical glasses. And I think that that's the value that we sometimes bring as penetration testers is to come in and look at a service or look at a program from a different lens and say, okay, I know on paper what you say that it's supposed to do. Now I'm going to look at what it's not supposed to do and see if I can make it do some interesting things. And that to me is kind of the joy of it. You're kind of sitting around in this playground and doing things that you maybe aren't supposed to do in almost a surreptitious way, but it's still kind of fun.
Yeah, and as a consultant, I imagine you get this quite a bit, right?
Mhm.
Working with different teams and just kind of understanding the likelihood, can this happen, or even watching developers have that aha moment. Do you run across this a lot in consulting?
Sometimes I think every development team is different. There are some where sometimes they'll have some security background or they'll have someone on their team that understands security to some degree. Especially in recent years, there's been a lot of companies that have been trying to, the big hashtag word shift left, where most people are trying to have some level of security mindedness. So some of them have that perspective. And then other ones, if you show up to a penetration test and they're like, I don't know what a penetration test is. I don't know who you are. I don't even know what are the things that it are. What are the things that you need to do the work that you need to do? Because I know nothing about the background that you're coming from. So it's always a little bit of a dance to figure out exactly where your audience is coming from and how so the both of you can get on the same page in order because you really need to work together to get this sort of work done. It's not like in the movies where you're just kind of with a hoodie on and alone in a dark room doing everything. It's very collaborative a lot of the times, especially for most of the stuff that I do, which is gray box rather than black box. So you kind of have to be able to manage people, manage expectations, and work together to understand what it is the developer team needs and what they can provide you in order so that you can get them what they need.
Yeah, and that's awesome because many times with our testing, we see very similar. You have to be the consultant. You have to augment their team. You have to understand and help bridge those connections between different teams, between understanding, between management, and developers and all of that. So that's really awesome to hear that you're helping guide companies and be that expert.
Yeah.
On your journey to be that expert, you've recently got well, probably not recently anymore, but you got your OCP, and that's a tough certification. And so,
Yeah.
walk us through what that journey was like.
Sure. So when I first got into cybersecurity, I had always heard about the OSCP, and I think the first thing that I heard about was someone saying that it was a 24-hour test. And I think that that moniker or that denotation really kind of said it as my white whale. I was like, oh man, this seems so daunting. I don't know if I can go at this. So I think it took me a couple years to really work up the nerve. And part of what actually helped me working up the nerve was almost like a level of spite because I had a colleague who he was like, oh yeah, I got it last month. I was like, well, if this guy can do it, I can go ahead and at least try. So he told me about it, and I think maybe 2 months later, I worked with my company, and I was like, "Hey, let me go ahead and start trying this training?" So I started practicing in January of 2024, and I had a year to get through it, to get through all of the training that offensive security provides, and it's very good training, and to get through all of the training and to attempt the test. I think they gave you 2 attempts. So, to talk about the actual studying process, it was pretty intense. I kind of slacked off at the first half of the year. And then around like August, I was like, okay, I only have until January. I need to knuckle down. So, there were a couple of weekends where literally it was Saturday from like 8 in the morning until 4 or 5 in the afternoon, just trying different things, practicing boxes, getting my technique up, making sure that I knew what I was doing when I was trying to get on a box. So eventually I scheduled my test for early October. I think it was October 9th I scheduled it for. And I'm a morning person. So I scheduled it for 6 a.m. They let you do it any hour of the day because again, it's 24 hours. And I started at 6 a.m. I get on there. I set up my webcam because you have to be on a webcam the entire time. And first thing goes wrong. My webcam stops working. So I'm like, I'm unplugging it, I'm replugging it. It's saying that it's not working. I was like, oh no, what's going on? So I
Distraction,
have to
right?
restart my, yeah, what do you say?
A distraction, right? It's like you want to be
Right,
focused on
exact.
the test, not like IT problems.
Exactly. So, because before this thing comes up, before the date comes up, you imagine it in your head so many times, and you never imagine the things that can go wrong, and something simple as a webcam. So I end up having to restart my whole computer, get back on. The proctor who's watching me is like, okay, you can go ahead and start. So I finally start around 7 or so, and I have until 5:45 a.m. the next day to finish. So I start at 7, and within the first hour, I finished the first box. I get my first 2 flags. I already had 10 bonus points going in. I got the first 2 flags. That was another 20 points. I only need 70 points to finish. I'm at 30 points by 8 a.m. I'm like, I've got 22 hours to do the rest of this. I should be golden. So I go at the next box to look at the first flag. I get the first flag, and I can't figure out the second flag. I can't figure out the privilege escalation to get the second flag. So I'm like, shoot, I'm kind of in a stuck place because either I go after the entire Active Directory to get 40 points, and that was the only way that I could pass, and then, or I can go after the other virtual machine, and even if I get both of those flags, that's still not enough to pass. So I'm going after the Active Directory, and I can't figure it out. So I think around like 11 or 11 o'clock, I'm still stuck. I'm like, well, let me just take a look at the third virtual machine to try to get those flags. Because even if I don't pass, maybe getting those 2 flags can help me figure out something that I didn't see with that privilege escalation on the second box, right? So I go after the third box and I get both of those. I'm good to go on that. So now I'm up to 60 points. I have 60 points out of 70 points that I need to pass, and it is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I can't figure out the Active Directory. I can't figure out the privilege escalation. I need one of these things to pass. So I'm racking my head. It's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm like, okay, let me break for lunch. I come back after lunch, still can't figure out either one of them. Around 3 o'clock, I break for a little bit again. And what do you know it? Power outage. Power goes out to my entire house. And for those that don't know, with the OSCP, you need to take screenshots of every single thing that you do. And I had planned to do that at the end. Since I didn't take those screenshots, in my head, I'm like, now I have to redo every single attack that I've done so far and get those screenshots since that my computer reset, right? So fortunately, the power comes right back on within a couple of seconds. So I jump back on, and in my head, I'm just like, I'm gonna have to redo these things so that I can get those screenshots that I need for my report. So I go back to trying to test, and then about 30 minutes later, again, power goes out again. This time, it doesn't come back in 5 minutes. It's an hour, it's 2 hours, it's 3 hours, it's 4 hours. I'm just looking at the clock, and my wife comes home from work and she was like, I thought you were doing a test. And I'm like, power's been out this
We're
entire time.
we're
I
gonna be doing
can't do
nothing but
anything.
reading books.
Right. I've just been doing nothing, just sitting there like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And here's the really disorienting part. In my head, I'm like, my power is out, but even if the power wasn't out, I'm still stuck. I'm
Yeah.
still stuck on this last 10 points. So 8 p.m. rolls around. The power company says we should have power back at 11. So my wife's like, well, why don't you go to sleep and then wake up at 11 and try again? So I do that. I go to sleep at 8. I set an alarm for 11. Midnight rolls around and my wife wakes me up. She's like, hey, you missed your alarm and the power is still not back on. They said it's going to be on at 5. I'll remind you that I need to be done by 5:45 on this test. I'm like, there's no way that the power comes back on at 5 and I figure this out in 45 minutes. There's no way. So in my head, I'm just like, well, I have a retake. I'm just going to retake this thing next month because they also give you a cool off period. I think you need to wait 3 to 4 weeks in between attempts. So I'm like, I'm just going to take this thing again next month. And she said, my wife told me, she was like, well, what if you just went to a hotel? And I said, I don't know. They have to like scan the room and everything. And I don't know if the proctor would let me do that. She was like, why don't you just try? So I had a laptop. I jumped on a laptop, had set up my hotspot. I went and interacted with the proctor. And I said, hey, if I go to a hotel, would I be able to finish the test? And he said, yes. So I said, okay. I shut everything down. I packed up everything. I packed up my computer. I packed up my monitor, my keyboard, everything, put it all in the gym bag. And I went off to the nearest hotel at 12 o'clock in the morning. It's dark outside. It's still dark because there's still no power. What it
Huh.
turns out is that a delivery truck had run into a telephone pole out there, and the entire neighborhood had no lights, so no street lights, anything. It's weird. It was really eerie. So I get to the hotel. I book a room. I'm sure I looked very impatient. And I get up to the room and I set everything up in my room. I get in touch with the proctor and he scans the room. He's like, okay, you're good to go. Go ahead and start testing. And this is 1 o'clock in the morning at this point, and I still don't know what I'm doing. I'm still looking through links that I've tried 5 different times. And I'm like, I can't figure out this privilege escalation because that's the shortest path to me beating this thing is getting that last 10 points of that privilege escalation. So I keep trying things. Nothing seems to be working. I have one last thing that I wanted to try. It was this link that I looked at 10 different times, and I was like, let me try this. I don't know if this is going to work. Let me just throw it at this thing. It's 3 a.m. I have 2 more hours. I'm going to throw this last thing and I'm going to pivot to doing Active Directory. If I can't get this here, I'm going to just pivot to doing Active Directory. So I had assigned myself to that, and I'm trying to do the Active Directory, and I go look back at the other terminal where I had thrown the payload, and it says connection. And in my head, I'm like, oh snap, wait, connection, hold on. And I'm trying to type things in, but I can't type anything in. It's not taking my input. So then I rethink about the problem, and I was like, well, maybe if I reconfigure the payload, it'll work. And sure enough, I reconfigure the payload, and I get a connection. I can type in. I do a who am I? It tells me I'm privilege escalation. I cry a little bit. It was just a very like emotional, amazing moment. And I go through, and over the next 2 hours, I redo all of the scans that I needed to do. I take all my screenshots. Long story short, I end up passing, and that's how everything ended up shaking out. It was passing in a hotel down the road.
Wow. Like looking at something like 10 times in a row and like being like, I swear I tried that. I swear I looked at that. I swear I did that. Like
Yeah.
that's a theme I always hear, but I do not hear power went out, had to go to a hotel room to actually complete it. That That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
Now, a lot's changed since I've taken it. So now you're on a webcam. It's proctored. Are you allowed to take breaks and stuff?
You are allowed to take breaks as much as you want. You just let the proctor know to say, "Hey, I'm getting up from my computer. I'm going to go to the bathroom. Hey, getting up from my computer. I'm going to go get some food." And they just say, "Okay," and they're fine with that. They need to have view because they're looking at you, but at the same time they're viewing you. They are also seeing your screen. They need to have full control and be able to see on your screen. So anytime you need to get up, you can. You can take breaks as long as you want, but I think they schedule it and frame the test such that you don't need the full 24 hours. Clearly, because I lost like 12 of them.
Yeah,
So,
right. Well,
yeah,
that was gonna be one of my questions for you is like, did you pass it on your first attempt? Because like that's you hear a
yeah.
lot of that, right? Which is like it took me two or three times, right? And that speaks to how challenging it is. So,
Mhm.
to pass it on your first try is really awesome.
Yeah, no, I felt very fortunate to be able to do it on the first try. I am infinitely grateful to my wife for coming up with the idea of going to the hotel
Yeah.
because I had definitely just resigned myself to be like, I'll just take it again next month. But to be able to say that I passed it on the first try is really a great accomplishment and it feels good.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you have a number of certifications.
Mm.
Can you speak to those? And then also, like, has any one of those really changed how you approach like security testing in general?
Sure. So it's not as much a certification as it is a course. So I have a background within the military. I was in the Navy, and the Navy sends their version of cybersecurity specialists. They send them to a course called the Joint Cybersecurity Analyst course. And parts of it are classified, but less of it is classified than you would think. A lot of it comes from actually like college courses and that course was really good in teaching me like the practical aspects of penetration testing and cybersecurity. They have this curriculum that takes 7 or 8 months to get through the entire thing, but they start you off with basic logic tables, truth tables, knights and knaves type practices to teach you that basic logic. And they bring you up to knowing the Windows OS, knowing the Linux OS, knowing the terminals, knowing some defensive operations as well as offensive operations, and all the way up to doing malware analysis and using ncase to do file carving and that sort of thing. So it teaches you this broad spectrum and very in-depth ways of doing things that I think really changed my ways of not just penetration testing, but looking at computers as a whole to the point where I got way more comfortable being behind a keyboard and interacting with a computer from a terminal perspective. To give an example of what that was, after I got out of that course, went back to my condo and I was living at my condo. And at the time, my wife, currently my girlfriend at the time, she had the condo next to mine and she was renting out to she had a subletter and they were getting messages from the ISP that, hey, you have an illegal streaming platform on your computer. If you don't stop using this torrenting application, we're going to shut off your internet. And the person who was subletting, she said, "Oh, I didn't know. I'm sorry. I will delete the application." And she deleted the application, but the mails kept coming. It kept coming. Like they kept saying, like, "Hey, you still have this application." She was like, "I deleted it. I don't know what's wrong." So my girlfriend at the time, wife now, she knew that I worked with computers and said, "Hey, can you help me with this problem? If she brings you her computer, can you figure out how to get this thing off of here?" And I said, "Yeah, bring me the computer." And she brings me the computer and it's a Mac. And I've always worked with PCs. I didn't really have much experience with Macs, but what I did know was that they're based on Unix. So I said, if I can get a terminal up, I can figure this out. And sure enough, I was able to get a terminal up. I saw that she still had the application somewhere within her files. I was able to actually delete it from the terminal, and that actually got rid of it, and the mail stopped coming. So I think having that basis in JCAC, the Joint Cyber Analyst course, we call it JCAC. having that basis in JCAC really helped me in those practical applications of how to figure things out in the real world.
That's really cool because it gives you that mindset of how to figure things out even when you're not quite familiar, right? Utilize the skills that you have and the skills that you've learned and apply
Yep.
those. It's a cool story. It's a cool story.
Yeah.
Now, you do a lot of network pen tests, and what's one of the common things that you see all the time on a network pen test? Uh, Maybe speak to it from like a internal network pen test perspective.
Sure. So internal network pen tests. One thing that I often see is more so like configuration based things. So it will be something like you've implemented something in your code and it's implemented in an insecure way. Or most often it's some sort of dependency that they're calling on that has been deprecated, or there's a known vulnerability with the dependency itself. So I think that that's something that people can often overlook is, yeah, my thing works and I've been able to import such and such library, but they don't know that such and such library was deprecated, or such and such library that somebody has some sort of CVE against it since ever. And it can be very easy to say, I've coded everything securely, but when you're importing other people's libraries, you also have to be aware of, is that library making sure that it's being updated? And is that library vulnerable to anything? Because if you're using a component that is vulnerable, that can have downstream effects to any service or product that uses that particular component. So that's probably the most common thing that I see.
Yeah. And what's the difference that you see like between the lab environments, like on the tests that you were taking and the certifications versus like real world networks?
I think the main difference is the mentality that you have to have. And the difference there is, when you're in a lab setting, you know there's a vulnerability. When you're in the real world, there's no guarantee that, especially with a lot of these companies that are spending millions and billions of dollars into their overall security architecture, there's no guarantee that they actually have any vulnerabilities, or maybe that they have any vulnerabilities that you can find. Because for anyone that's ever been in penetration testing, especially when you first start out, it's not just that there's things that you don't know. There's things that you don't know that you don't know. It's a fractal level of ignorance that you go into it with, where yeah, they might have this vulnerability, but maybe I don't even know that this vulnerability exists, and even if I did, I don't know how to exploit it. So I find that remembering that when you're in a real world scenario causes you to make sure that you are being as cautious as possible, and you are reaching out to your lifelines as much as possible.
It reminds me of there's a graph out there where it some meme or something that I saw on Twitter or X long time
Mhm.
ago. And it's kind of like, this is me as a pen tester, like I'm riding a wave going into the pen test, I find these vulnerabilities, and then, I have to write a report and that sucks, but then I hit like a wall, right? And then I
Mhm.
think like, oh my God, I'm going to run out of time, for this engagement.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of funny to see the emotional roller coaster that's happening as a tester.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
you even highlight it in your OSCP story, right? High
Yeah, you
stakes
talk about a roller coaster.
there, right? But what do you do, Daniel, when you like hit a wall during a real world test where you're like, I don't have some sort of initial compromise or initial foothold or that exploit that's going to take you to the next step or the next phase. What do you do when you hit that wall?
Yeah, that's the one advantage I think that you have in the real world versus the lab, is that you're not alone. That's one thing that I really appreciate with the communities I've been in, is that you can reach out to other people to say, hey, let me get a sanity check on this. I've done one, two, three, four, and five. Is there something I'm missing? Is there something that I don't know that I don't know? And sometimes you get somebody else and they say, yeah, you're doing everything that I would do. And sometimes even that's good enough to give you that sense of, okay, well, I'm trying as hard as I can. I've done everything that makes sense. And maybe it's just the fact that because I have submitted reports where there aren't any findings. I always like to reference the quote where it's something about Evel Knievel. You're similar to Evel Knievel in that when you're a pen tester, you get paid for the attempt. So if you don't necessarily find anything, it's not the best feeling in the world, and it's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world at the same time. But when you do hit that wall, one of the first things I do is just try to reach out to other folks. And really, what helped me in the lab environment, specifically on my OSCP, is really just starting back from scratch. Once you've gone through steps 1 through 20 and nothing's making sense, sometimes going right back to step one can be very valuable because sometimes there's something you've missed, especially if it's something you've done over and over and over. And my bachelor's degree is in math, and I learned this there, doing triple integrals and stuff, is that sometimes the most basic things can trip you up, and sometimes you need to go back and do the simple basic things, and that's what really makes everything else work. Because you have to remember, we're working with computers, and as everything we like to call it smart and AI, computers are really stupid. If you type in the wrong thing, if you type a T when you meant to type an R, the computer's not going to say, "Hey, did you mean to type a T?" It's just going to do what you told it to do. And if you don't have that level of granular attention to detail, then that's what's going to throw off everything else that you try to do afterwards.
Yeah, that might, that might be your whole attack path just neutered right there because you
Hmm.
accidentally type something wrong and you don't think your exploit it's not working and things like that. And so I could totally relate. And a lot of people would say, I've done pen testing, red teaming for a long time, and if I always find a way in, and I'm like in a consultant world. You haven't consulted enough because someone's going to give you a scope so tight that you don't have
Yep.
anything to go off of, and it's been pen tested for a decade, So like, if you do consulting long enough, you'll get those scopes, and then you'll be giving a report that is clean, which should be a win. But
Yeah.
sometimes, if it's a too narrow of a scope, it doesn't feel like a win. It just bothers you as a tester.
Yeah, and I think those are the situations in which you really have to rely on your capability of communicating what it is that you've done.
Hmm.
So if you're going to submit a report that doesn't have any findings, or like one that I just did where I had one finding, that's where you lean on your ability to communicate in your test plan. Hey, here are the things that I did. Here are the things that I tried. Here are why the things that I did didn't work, or here are what the responses of your system actually were. Having that level of detail within your test plan can often give yourself and it gives your client the level of security and peace of mind that they need to know that, oh, okay, this person did try a lot of things and they did do a lot of work. It's just that we've done our due diligence and we're fairly secure.
Yeah, right on. And our customers, they get access to a platform where we show all that work and we call it attack narratives, but
Yeah.
90% of those are going to be failures, right? Because that's what you do as
Hmm.
a tester is you fail, fail, fail
Yeah.
until you have a win. And a win from a tester's perspective is a finding. And it's also an action item that you need to help your customer fix as well, too. So yeah,
Yeah.
having proof of that work is key.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, What's one of the most important skills a new penetration tester should master?
Yeah, this is a question I was actually talking to someone in my company with recently, and I think the one that we ended up landing on was the ability to read code to some degree. It doesn't need to be any specific language, just pick one. As long as you can look at a bit of code and generally understand what it's trying to do at that particular point in the overall workflow, that can go a long way because I think sometimes we often forget, obviously, as developers and as these companies have gotten larger and larger, the code itself is obfuscated by all of the widgets and bobbles and stuff that we like to put in front of it. But you have to remember that everything, all of the stuff that we do relies on and runs on code to some degree. And if it runs on that language and you can speak that language and you have the ability to change things within that code base, Now you can make it do things that maybe it wasn't necessarily designed to do, and that is effectively on the textbook definition of really what you're doing when you're hacking or when you're doing a penetration test is affecting the code to some degree to make it do something that it's not supposed to do. So knowing that language of code is really key into getting really deep into this line of work. There are a lot of people that scares them away because they don't really like code or whatever, but it's still very crucial.
Nice. What would you think number two would be, Daniel? I'm curious.
If I had to be two, you've got to be comfortable with a terminal, ideally a Linux terminal. You can do a Windows terminal too. That's kind of like tertiary. But if I had to name a number two, it would definitely be a terminal, specifically a Linux terminal, because especially a lot of these penetration testing tools, Kali Linux, that sort of stuff, all of it runs, a lot of it's built for, runs a lot better on Linux. You have a lot more freedom to work within a Linux environment as well. Whereas with Windows, you can sometimes sometimes be constrained by certain things that are hard to get around within Windows. Whereas Linux, as long as you've got sudo, as long as you've got root, you could delete the entire OS and they won't care. Like you've got that free reign to do what you need to do. And sometimes that's exactly what you need in order to do the work as a penetration tester.
Yeah, and before we wrap up here, any parting advice for like leaders that are trying to build defenses in their organizations? Any perspective you have as a consultant, as an attacker of things that they should do?
Yeah, I think the concept of like thinking like an attacker, thinking like someone who wants to break into your system. And what I mean by that is really looking at, okay, you're putting out some sort of product and it's going to be used by everyone. You've already thought about how it's supposed to work. Take a little bit of moment to think about, okay, I'm a bad person, or I'm a person who wants to use this for nefarious purposes. Where do I have the most freedom to input information? If you've locked down your input fields or everything like that, that could be a great place to start. Check maybe what are my APIs sending? Like maybe if I'm sending something across the wire and there's a token in the URL string, could an attacker use that? That's a very granular level of looking at it. But if you're talking about from a more strategic perspective, again, it's that concept of shifting left, making sure that security is baked in as early as possible into your overall SDLC to make sure that security isn't really an afterthought. I think that that's been the case for a long time is that, okay, we're going to make it so that it works. And then later on, we'll figure out and see if we can make it secure. And what we've been finding in overall over the years is the sooner within the overall process you can think about how am I going to secure this, the better off you are because then you're not having to try to retrofit secure concepts, secure coding concepts, and secure architecture onto something that was developed insecurely in the first place. You're less likely to miss things and it just helps the overall process to be more secure. So shifting left as much as possible and thinking like an attacker to try to figure out where your users, your end users have the most freedom.
That's great advice. Daniel, that's all we have time for today, but thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Casey.
If you've made it this far, do me a favor and check out what we do at Sprocket Security. If you're ever in need of a penetration test and you want that hybrid scalable approach, the always testing, always on, not this fake click a button, do a pen test 2 weeks and then do that 5 times a year. No, I mean always on, always testing, latest bleeding edge threat that comes out there, latest exploit, phishing, all the way to, defense evading, covert operations, whatever type of pen test you need. We'll do it as frequently as possible, and we'll also provide a platform for us to interact together. I've devoted the last 5 years of my life to building penetration testing and innovating upon it and changing it so you can actually do security testing, proactive security testing in a much better way. Give it a shot. Check us out, www.sprocketsecurity.com.